In addition to encoding information, I am very much so an advocate for to-do lists. There is no way possible we can remember everything, at least the priorities that we need to do as adults. Verbatim. Coding information. Encoding the transformation as well as the transfer of information into a memory system requires, in general, selective attention, the focusing of awareness on a particular set of stimuli or events. Information may also be encoded at different levels of processing. Consider, for example, the possible processing levels concerning a word projected briefly on a screen. Shallow, structural. Processing focuses on the physical characteristics of the written word. Intermediate, phonemic. Processing focuses on phonemic encoding, the sound of the word, and deep semantic processing focuses on semantic encoding, the meaning of the word. Encoding may be enhanced by means of visual imagery, formation of visual images of things to be remembered, elaboration, developing an association linked to the topic to be remembered, relevance, making the material to be remembered personally relevant, that's my favorite, and through the following organizational procedures. Chunking, organizing the material to be remembered into groups as, for example, telephone numbers are arranged, area code 3 digits and 4 digits. Hierarchies, grouping information to be remembered into categories and possibly into hierarchies consisting of major and minor concepts. I mean, if we don't practice the things that we store, how will we remember it? There's no way it will store in that memory bank. Memory storage, verbatim. Memory is stored by means of 3 memory systems: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory preserves incoming sensory information in its original sensory form for only a fraction of a second. A visual memory trace is called an icon. An auditory memory trace is called an echo. Sensory memory extends the duration of the perception of stimuli long enough that they can be recognized, transformed, encoded, and relayed to conscious awareness. Short-term memory has a limited duration, 15 to 30 seconds, and a limited capacity believed to be about 7 pieces of information. In his 1956 study, George Miller spoke of the magical number of 7, plus or minus 2. It is thought that STM can be increased by using a tactic called maintenance rehearsal, rote recital of stored information. Long-term memory has an unlimited capacity and a very long duration. It is virtually limitless. Repetition and elaborative rehearsal, manipulation of information by giving it meaning, are helpful techniques in storing information in LTM, long-term memory. I love you too. Indel Toving divided LTM into procedural memory, retention of stimulus response associations and patterns of procedural responses such as skipping rope and riding a bicycle. Episodic memory, memories of life events or experiences. Semantic memory, knowledge of words, symbols, or concepts and the rules for their manipulation or usage, such as in a language. Whatever it takes for you to remember, for it to stick, whether you have to relate it to your family, whether you have to relate it to yourself, whether you have to put your favorite color after it to remember what goes before it, whatever technique helps you. There's no way you're going to remember it all just off the strength of trying to remember. Either write it down or figure out visual techniques that you can do or use. Or figure out visual techniques that you can use in your head to figure this shit out. Don't be late. You don't know your deadline.
So I'm in class and I'm learning about memory. And tell me why I just learned 2 crazy things. I learned that you can retrieve memory if you learn it intentionally with your senses. So if you are trying to study for something, let's say, but you're using like peppermint, you can sniff the peppermint while you're studying for it. And then later on, if you forget the information later, you can smell the peppermint and it can help to trigger what you tried to remember. The second thing that I learned is that there's something called state-dependent learning. And obviously this is really nuanced. But for some reason, if you learn some information or have a memory of being drunk, but while you were drunk, but you forget it, if you get drunk again, you can recall the memory. That's a really bad example of it, but my mind is blown.
Now, this is memory retrieval, verbatim. Retrieval is the process of getting information out of memory. Retrieval cues are stimuli that can be used to help retrieve memories. Priming is the process of identifying traces, perhaps associations made at the time the memory was formed, that led to a memory. Some researchers believe that recalling the context of the original experience assists in retrieval. Others believe that recalling the mood associated with the memory formation, a process called state-dependent learning, is helpful. For example, a person who is feeling depressed might recall an event that occurred during a previous period of depression. Some people create mental pictures of an event or object, a process called imagery, to enhance retrieval. A few individuals employ an extremely detailed photographic visualization called eidetic imagery. Everybody is different, and all three or some may work for different people. But for me, in addition to these, listening to a song can literally place me back to that time. The friends I had, maybe the situations that were going on at the time, maybe the circumstances I was under, maybe the arguments that was taking place. I will remember. Just put on a good song. Again. You're like, here she go again. Forgetting every damn thing, whether it was just said to you, whether you just read it, said it, goddamn. Memory loss. Forgetting. Verbatim. Forgetting is the loss or failure of memory. Hermann Ebbinghaus studied the relationship between ease of relearning, called savings, and the time between learning and relearning, which he expressed as a forgetting curve. He found that most forgetting occurs during the first 9 hours after learning. Practice, both massed and distributed over time, also affects relearned forgotten material. Ebbinghaus also found that the more an individual rehearses a list of syllables, the better the syllables are recalled. And as would be expected, given the primacy and recency effects, syllables near the beginning or end of a list are recalled best. When graphed, the effects of practice results in a U-shaped curve. Measures of retention. Memories may be retrieved in 3 ways. Recall, remembering of previously learned information, free recall. Recall of items in any order, serial recall. Recall of items in the order in which they were learned. Paired associate recall. Recall of a second item based on a cue supplied by a first item. Recognition, identification of previously learned information, as for example from a number of answered choices in a multiple choice test. Reconstruction, rebuilding of a scenario from certain remembered details. Now, these are reasons for forgetting, no matter the detriment, whether minute and trivial or severe. Decay is loss of information from memory as a consequence of die passage of time and lack of use. It has been suggested that memory is stored in memory traces which disappear when not used for a long time. Like when you leave school and you don't use those lessons taught, and then you wonder why you forgot everything. Interference is the confusion of one piece of information with another, or the suppression of one in favor of another that was processed about the same time, as might happen, for example, if a student takes a Spanish lesson one period and a French lesson the next. This happens if I read 2 books at the same time. I start putting a character from one book in the other. Proactive interference occurs if previously learned materials interferes with learning of new material. Retroactive interference occurs if learning of new material interferes within the ability to recall previously learned material. Good old amnesia, or is the inability to remember events from the past because of a psychological trauma, psychogenic amnesia, or a psychological trauma, organic amnesia, such as brain damage resulting from a blow to the head. The memory loss is usually limited to a specific period. Retrograde amnesia is the inability to remember happenings that preceded the traumatic event producing the amnesia. Anterograde amnesia is the inability to remember happenings that occur after a traumatic event. People sometimes forget things because they find them too unpleasant to think about. Such an occurrence is called motivated forgetting. Sigmund Freud attributed many memory failures, particularly involving painful childhood experiences, to repression, the process of keeping disturbing thoughts or feelings relegated to the unconscious. The repressed material can sometimes be recalled through free association or hypnosis. The recovery of supposedly repressed memories, such as those of childhood sexual abuse, is controversial. Some psychologists, such as Elizabeth Loftus, have called some of the recovered information false memories and suggested that sometimes such information has been implanted by the client's therapist.